it feels like at the moment it's a very top-down like driven thing. Like the banks are all running with this, like they're offering these to their products, even like Itaú, which is the largest bank, I think in Latin America actually, like the largest private bank anyway. But now you're seeing a lot of money leaving the country, USDT, for example.
The population of Brazil is around 200 million people, and the GDP is around 2.1 trillion. And we're seeing this fintech evolution, we're seeing this regulatory evolution. How do you see the Brazilian market evolving in the next 3 to 5 years?
This is probably the most like interesting CBDC project in the world right now, I would argue. It's not the best time in Brazil right now from a prosperity perspective. It just begs the question of like how much liquidity is there going to be into these types of markets.
Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Frontera, the podcast where we analyze what's happening in crypto in Latin America. I'm Ab, co-founder of and CEO of Espacio Crypto and Bando, and today we have Aaron Stanley from the Brazil Crypto Report. And man, you have the most impressive setting to record this podcast. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Amazing. And we're also with Kush, founder of Odisea Labs. Remember to subscribe to the Frontera newsletter. We've been publishing some killer reports on Felix Pago. Today we're going to publish one in Brazil. We published one in On-Chain FX. So let's dive in right away. And first, Aaron, could you introduce yourself? Give us a little bit about your background. What's your story on crypto and how the Brazil Crypto Report came to be?
Yeah, happy to. So thanks again for the invitation. Some quick background on me. So I started my career as a journalist about 10, 15 years ago in Washington, D.C., spent some time at Financial Times, did some trade publications, some of the things. Ended up kind of going down the Bitcoin crypto rabbit hole like 2016, 2017, just because there was a lot of interest in crypto in Washington, D.C. at that point. And I was kind of there. So I was going to all these congressional hearings in 2017 about crypto. So I could say I was like the first crypto congressional reporter, perhaps back in the day. And then I ended up joining CoinDesk. Yeah, after that, I spent about 5 years at CoinDesk as a reporter editor for a while. I spent 3 years producing Consensus, which is the big conference that's actually going on now as we're recording this in Toronto. And then a couple of years ago, I made the jump over to Filecoin Foundation. So spent a couple of years working as editorial director at Filecoin Foundation. And I've been doing this Brazil Crypto Report project as kind of a side project, I guess, for 3-4 years now. Just as a personal kind of hobby. It started as just a personal hobby. I guess my wife is Brazilian. I spend a lot of time in Brazil. Like I've, speak Portuguese, all that stuff. And I perceived when I was at CoinDesk that there was really no English language content at all covering Brazil or Latin America. And around that time, that was kind of the Substack newsletter boom when everybody was spinning up their own Substack newsletters, right? So I decided, hey, maybe I'll take a chance and let's spin up something and just something an interesting niche that might grow into something. So I started doing this, and here I am still doing it. A couple years later, people keep reading it, so eventually evolved into a podcast. And I'm trying to do more stuff. Now I'm kind of rebranding, doing a bit more. I guess less trying to be like I'm less of a journalist now, and more of kind of a strategic comms person. So doing a lot more kind of just advisory, content, communication strategy, kind of event strategy, stuff like that, related to crypto in Brazil and LATAM. So thanks again for the invitation to be here.
And Aaron, it's such a pleasure to have you on here. And from the moment we met in Brussels, really deep into kind of leveraging a lot of your insights and very unique knowledge on Brazil. As Ab was saying, I think there's it takes a very specific subset of person to be able to dive into crypto in a very crypto native way, right? You work at the Filecoin Foundation, but then also be able to talk with in-depth level of expertise about a particular market, in this case Brazil, which is arguably one of Latin America's most important crypto markets, both in terms of its size and capital flows. Part of the intention for this podcast is to go really deep into understanding, why is Brazil so special? From the very first recording we had with Ab, we remarked on the fact that there are entire companies that are dedicated towards helping Latin American-based companies enter into Brazil, because the context is so different. It's a different language. GDP per capita is much higher than a lot of other Latin American countries. The fintech and innovation tech landscape is much more advanced than a lot of other countries in the region. So I think maybe if you could give us a very high level 10,000 foot overview of what does crypto in Brazil look like right now? How has it evolved? What is that process? And over the course of your time covering the Brazil market through the Brazil Crypto Report, what evolutions have you seen in the Brazilian crypto markets?
Yeah, so right now, I think Brazil probably is the leading example globally of kind of this institutionalization of crypto, right? Where like you have the banks, the fintechs, crypto all kind of converging together. And what I mean by that is that you have, for a variety of reasons that we'll go into a bit later, but just to kind of set the stage here, you have a financial system, banking system that over the last 10, 15 years has been very aggressively innovating. And this innovation is coming top down from the central bank. So prior to maybe like Nubank coming along in early 2010s, the Brazilian financial system was like, it was basically this oligarchy of like, you had like 4 or 5 banks. There was no real competition. There was no real innovation. And starting about 10, 15 years ago, there was really this massive push towards digitalization, toward opening up some of these verticals, towards allowing these digital banks like a Nubank to come into play to start operating these banks. So the idea that you could have a bank that's just an app with no physical bank branch that you can go to, this whole idea was pretty revolutionary to people here. But Brazilians are always very early adopters of technology on finance and other areas. So people really ran with this idea that, oh, you can just, you can use a Nubank app on your phone instead of having to, bank with like this kind of, a traditional bank that's just kind of been around forever, hasn't really offered anything new. And I think you've seen so the banking system has really been innovating a lot of new products coming out, a lot of new developments, a lot of just kind of opening up some of these silos, I guess you could say, and bringing in more competition, et cetera. And that's produced a lot of like these fintech apps, and a lot of these fintech apps are the first that are really kind of diving headfirst into crypto, right? And then the big banks, seeing how much success some of these fintech apps are having with crypto, they're all trying to kind of get in as well. And there's some other factors too that are promoting this. Is like the central bank is doing this big CBDC project called Drex, which we'll talk about later, I assume. And that's kind of been a top-down catalyst for the banking system to build blockchain teams, to start running nodes, to really start understanding these products, et cetera. And then, so that's kind of like a glimpse on the retail side. And then on the kind of on the more crypto native side, I guess, you have, Brazil's kind of been a battleground amongst, you have a lot of like very like hyper localized, but like very effective exchanges. So things like Foxbit, Mercado Bitcoin that have been around for ages. And these guys did a really good job kind of coming out and servicing the Brazilian market back in the early days. And then ever since, 2020, 2021, there's been an influx of these big, like kind of global players, like your Binances and your OKXs and stuff. And now more recently, you have Coinbase coming in. You have some other exchanges coming in. So it's become kind of this battleground among kind of your global exchanges, like your successful localized exchanges, and then your banks and your fintechs that are also starting to offer these products to their customers as well. And so it's a really unique market in that sense. And we haven't even touched on like the tokenization aspect of it, right? So that like Brazil is probably going to be the leading country in the world when it comes to like asset tokenization and integrating the stuff into the financial system. Especially if this Drex project works out, which is basically, I mean, you had the governor of the central bank, or the ex-governor, I guess he's not there anymore. He actually went to Nubank, they announced that last week. But you had the governor or the president of the central bank, in his own words, saying that we are going to tokenize the financial system, right? We're going to be building tokenized rails for the financial system to run on. And that's something you expect to hear at a crypto conference, but that's not something you expect to hear from the CEO or from the president of a central bank of a G20 country, right? So you have a lot going on a lot of various fronts here, and it's quite a bit different from what you see in other Latin American countries, which is quite interesting. So happy to dive into that, but maybe I'll leave it there and we can double click on whichever points you guys want to go into.
Yeah, a little backstory on my background. I actually worked for 4 years for a management consulting firm in Brazil. So I have some of the understanding of the cultural differences of Brazilians and other countries in Latin America. Kush and I always say that it seems that Brazilians are the most degen country in LATAM, in a good way. I mean, they are the most advanced. They are the most prone to invest, I think, in the region. Not because of crypto, but they have this long history of investing in government bonds, in the stock market, and they are more like a risk-taking people. And then with all the evolution, also, for example, the first ETF of Solana in the world was the Brazilian one. I think that also the first ETF of XRP in the world was the Brazilian one. So there's a lot of these hints on how progress is taking place in Brazil. And I'd love to talk about, before talking about regulation and Drex and all of these huge market that covering it in one podcast is really hard. I'd love to hear your takes on how crypto is taking place from a fintech perspective. Because as you said, in Brazil, you have the Foxbits, the Mercado Bitcoins, recently Binance, OKX, Coinbase. So everyone wants a footprint and everyone wants a piece of the pie in Brazil, right? And now Nubank is also heavily investing on crypto on the back end, mostly stablecoins. They've done several experiments, and it seems that the missing link for crypto around the world were stablecoins, and we are now discovering them. So I would love to hear your takes on the fintech ecosystem and crypto. How do you see that this technology will change the traditional fintech ecosystem in Brazil?
Yeah, it's a great question. And like I alluded to earlier, I think it's unique that you have the fintechs in Brazil were really, I mean, you have these massive players, right? When we're talking about Nubank, it's not just like, oh, some cute little fintech app, right? This is a bank with 100 million customers, like just in Brazil, right? Like it's a massive, massive company. So I think when you had Nubank enable crypto on its platform, maybe about 2 years ago, they enabled crypto buys and sells. It was, I mean, I think they had like 4 million new users that they onboarded in like, you know, the first month, right? It was an insane amount. Like they actually broke there's a system with the Receita Federal that these brokerages have to report like their customers' transactions to the tax authority. And like the system actually broke down because Nubank was sending in so many of these reports from all these new customers that were buying crypto. And then you also have a few other big fintech companies, like things like Mercado Pago, which is it's not as big here as in Argentina, but it's still pretty big, right? So obviously the fintech arm of Mercado Libre, or Mercado Libre, I guess in Spanish. And then you also had things like PicPay, which is another, I think it's the second largest. Nubank has about 60 million users, and these guys had crypto for a while, and then they actually shut down their crypto platform because this is unconfirmed, but this is like what everyone says kind of behind closed doors, is that they're trying to go public in the US, and like during the kind of Gary Gensler era with the SEC, they didn't want to be associated with crypto, so they kind of killed that platform. But they'll probably bring it back eventually, I would assume. So you have a lot of these platforms that are offering crypto, and it's not just like oh, you can buy and sell Bitcoin. Like Nubank has, I think they have something like 20 different coins you can buy, right? So it's stable coins you can get. They have a partnership with Circle where if you're holding USDC, you can get, I think it's like 4% APY on your USDC. You have so it's a pretty like robust system, right? They're a pretty robust platform, pretty robust offering. And they're also kind of degen about it in the sense that they are allowing you to withdraw your coins to your own self-hosted wallet or to another wallet. You can transfer the coins out of Nubank to somewhere else. So that's something. I mean, that's, as we've seen a lot of fintech players come into the market in various other parts of the world. That's always been kind of this issue where it's like, okay, you can buy Bitcoin on this platform, but the only thing you can do with it is just sell it back to the platform. You can't take it off, right? You can't self-custody it, or you can't send it to somebody else. So some of these Brazilian fintechs, they started with that, and then they with that approach, which is usually easier from a regulatory perspective, and then they eventually enable withdrawals and self-transfers and that kind of thing. And perhaps the biggest, if we're on the subject of fintech, perhaps like the biggest, I think maybe killer application of fintech and crypto is Pix. And because Pix makes it super easy to send money to deposit money into a crypto platform. So a lot of these, so if you're a crypto platform opening in Brazil, if you're an exchange or you're a DeFi platform or whatever, like you have to have if you want people to use your platform, you have to have a Pix integration. So people can just send you a Pix of the deposit, right? So you don't have to worry about your credit cards being blocked for whatever reason, because it's a suspicious transaction, whatever, anything like this. Pix just enables it, like instant transaction, boom, you send the Pix, boom, the funds are in your account and you're ready to go. And, it's like people have been competing on how quickly they can basically, allow customers to Pix in, Pix out funds. Right. And if if it takes you, 5-10 seconds longer than the next guy, you're going to lose that business probably. So that's become a major point of competition, is like who can enable like the quickest and easiest Pix on ramps onto their platforms.
So this is really fascinating. I think taking it like a bit of a meta look at the situation in Brazil. Essentially, what I think is incredibly unique about Brazil is how innovative and forward-thinking the central bank has been, regulators have been, and so on, right? And that's evident in Nubank, David Vélez, he's Colombian, and he decided to launch in Brazil, right? So there's clearly something at, I think, probably the upper echelons of regulatory infrastructure of Brazil that is ultimately unlocking this. So following on from that thought, what I would love your takes on, Aaron, are where does that come from? Why have we, because this banking mafia basically exists across Latin America, right? It's essentially sort of a very elite group of people who control a lot of the financial infrastructure across the region. Why did Brazil at the national level decide to open up the doors for a lot of financial innovation? And then the follow-on question to that, given that there is this opening at the regulatory level, how and why do Brazilians care about crypto? And what has this state level led adoption and unlocking of crypto? What does that enable Brazilians to do that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do with crypto?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll start with the first question. So, I mean, what really prompted this shaking of the financial system essentially to allow more innovation? I think it was, granted, I wasn't here in that time. I wasn't necessarily following Brazil at that time, so I wasn't around during those days. But I think it was just this realization that, like, look, like other countries are moving on this, and we're still kind of with this existing cartel of banks. We haven't really innovated that much. We still have a pretty massive, like, underserved financial population, and I think it was just there was some leadership at the central bank that was, they had the kind of the mandate, I guess, to push the banks to start embracing some of these ideas. So, in the central bank took the lead on developing PIX. Which is basically, the banks weren't super like happy about participating with this because they're losing a lot of fees in terms of payment business and whatnot. Because PIX is essentially free for most transactions. It's just a free transaction, right? It's easily thought of as it's almost like a payment system as a public utility, basically. So like a PayPal is a public utility that's just administered on a spreadsheet at the central bank, essentially. So I think that was there was. You had a governor of the central bank, Roberto Campos Neto, who just had this vision of, we want to bring innovation to the financial system, and he very aggressively pursued that. And I think he gave enough kind of cover to his team to be able to pursue that and to put, give enough of a carrot and stick incentive model to the banks to be able to play along and to go along with it. And then on to the second question, it's interesting because you have like crypto in Brazil still seems like a very kind of top down thing, right? It hasn't really like trickled down to the organic level too much. Like you don't necessarily hear, you don't necessarily like, you don't see like pay with USDT signs all over the place like you would see in Argentina or other countries. Sometimes you'll find an Uber driver who's like talking about Dogecoin or something, but it hasn't like really trickled down to the retail level. So it's really kind of more of an institutional thing at this stage, which is kind of interesting because that's, it's not really how it, like, I feel like in other places, crypto has always been more of an organic thing, like a bottom up thing. But here it feels like it's kind of more of a top down thing right now. You have, there's a number of reasons for that. I think one is you had just over the, the last 5-6 years, you had a lot of really bad pyramid schemes where people lost a lot of money investing in some of these very kind of dodgy, like, just like blatant pyramid schemes where it's like, oh, you'll earn like 10%, daily returns or whatever on this investment. And I have some sort of trading robot that's going to take your crypto and 10x your returns kind of thing. So that was unfortunate. So I think a lot of people got burned, and a lot of people know people who got burned investing in these things. Unfortunately, there's also, I think the 2021 wave, I think a lot of people also got burned on like a lot of play to earn gaming, like Axie Infinity type stuff got really big here. Like there were some of the biggest Axie Infinity guilds in the world operating in Brazil and or in Latin America generally, but I think the biggest one was in Brazil here. And obviously some of those games didn't really end very well for most people. So I think a lot of people got fried. And a lot of people, if we're talking about just like mind share of consumers, right? If you're looking at crypto, there's various ways you can look at crypto, right? Like you can look at crypto as an investment. You can look at it as this revolutionary technology. There's a lot of people who look at it as entertainment, right? And I think a lot of people here, they see it maybe perhaps as another form of entertainment. And there's the introduction of sports gambling, like these online betting houses into the country over the last couple of years has, I think, massively cut into the kind of the consumer wallet share of what they might be spending on crypto, investing in crypto. Like a lot of that's going to like these sports gambling sites now. Which is a whole other conversation, but it's huge. Like every every Brazilian soccer club you can find has like an online casino sponsoring them on their, on their jersey, like PixBet or MaxiBet or these types of things. So that's kind of cut into some of the wallet share of like retail people who would be interested in crypto. So it feels like at the moment it's a very top down like driven thing. Like the banks are all running with this, like they're offering these to the products, even like Itaú, which is the largest bank, I think in Latin America, actually, like the largest private bank anyway. I mean, they're expanding their crypto brokerage, their product offerings to retail clients, not just high net worth people, but retail. Like BTG has their own offering. Most of, like some of the other digital banks have crypto platforms up and running as well. The others are all waiting on regulation to come in, which is supposed to come later this year. They've been saying that for 2 years now, and we don't have it. So, but they say it's coming later this year now, so we'll see. But I think a lot of the banks are just kind of, they have this stuff ready to go. They're just going to flick a switch once they get the regulatory clearance to go ahead with it.
Yeah, and with that regulatory clearance, I'd love to talk a little bit more about regulation, because we've been covering a lot of the regulatory landscape of Brazil in our news roundups. And something that we've noticed is that this is the classical advanced market dilemma. So you have cutting edge technology like Pix, that I think that and UPI in India are the best payment systems in the world. Like everyone in the payments world knows it. It's just fascinating to see. I don't know, you go to Brazil and there's someone in the street, I don't know, doing some juggling, and they have a Pix QR code to pay them. The penetration of Pix is really impressive. And also like what you said about investing, a lot of evolution in crypto markets, a lot of evolution in tokenization. And at the same time, the central bank is thinking about Drex and this CBDC, that it's kind of like a opposing force to all of this innovation, because it's a closed system. CBDCs can be really risky, everything that we know. And beyond that, they proposed this bill to ban withdrawals to external wallets, like stablecoin withdrawals to external wallets. So could you give us like a quick rundown about these regulatory approaches? Because in one side, the market seems that it's moving really fast at a product/technology level. And in the regulatory way, they are also moving really fast, but I'm not sure that they're moving towards the same direction.
Yeah, I mean, this is really kind of the big question that's weighing on everybody right now in the market, is this stablecoin proposal. And I guess for those who aren't aware, the central bank, they put out a public consultation with some proposed regulations for stablecoins, basically trying to regulate stablecoins as FX transactions, or regulate stablecoin markets as they would an FX market. And they put this out, I think, back in like November or December. But basically, they're proposing to make it like if you're you can't withdraw stable coins from, say, your Binance account or your Mercado Bitcoin account. You can't send them to a self-hosted wallet. So you can't send them to your Ledger, can't send them to your MetaMask. You can only send them to other kind of whitelisted accounts that are hosted on exchanges, basically. And this definitely caught a lot of people by surprise. People were not expecting this proposal because, as you mentioned, the central bank has been generally people have been pretty like they praise the central bank and say like, wow, these guys are really understand tech. They're taking time to understand the market. Like they're doing a pretty good job. Like they're well ahead. They're very much like ahead of the curve compared to like other global regulators looking at this issue. And there's so the stablecoin issue is difficult. And I think one of the main reasons is that I think the people that are, I forget which exact division it is that's in the central bank that's overseeing this, right? There's various divisions within the central bank, I think, which makes it a little bit more complicated. So there's one division that would be regulating like the VASPs and service providers, another division that's going to be regulating the foreign exchange stablecoin elements of this. So that makes it a little bit more complicated because it's not necessarily the same people and maybe they're not talking to each other or whatever. But it's problematic because obviously this is something that cuts at the whole, this is the whole value proposition of crypto, right? Is to be able to like move money around autonomously, to be able to kind of own your own assets and control your own assets and be able to transfer those assets without necessarily any intermediaries telling you who you can and can't transact with. But there's, putting myself in their shoes, okay, they have some reasons to be concerned that I think are legit. Like I think some recent data that came out of the central bank showed that something like 20% of the capital outflows last year in their current accounts, deficit was via crypto, right? Whether stablecoins or other assets. So they know that people are using crypto to send money out of the country. And obviously at that time when they proposed it was right around the time, I think it was November, December, when the real was crashing to like its all-time low against the dollar at like, 6.5 to the dollar. And the central bank had to intervene and start selling dollars on the open market, start selling its foreign currency reserves to try to prop up the real. So they had to intervene pretty massively there. So it was kind of a sensitive time, right? And I think a lot of these guys, these technocrat guys like at the central bank that are proposing these rules, these are guys that have been around a long time, right? The central bank hasn't really, for some various reasons, they haven't been able to like bring in new staff into the bank. So they're pretty understaffed, and a lot of people are there have been there for pretty much their entire careers. So you have a lot of guys who have been through the currency crises of 30, 40 years ago in Brazil. And to these guys, like capital flight and enabling capital flight like this is like the worst thing that could possibly happen, right? So they're paranoid that, it's just going to be this like giant sucking sound, I guess, to quote Ross Perot talking about NAFTA, but this, giant sucking sound of money leaving Brazil via USDT. So that's becoming a pretty contentious issue right now. The market has been very, I'll say pretty much 100% opposed to that and has communicated that to the bank. As of right now, it does not look like the central bank is going to change their minds on this rule, according to what people I've been talking to.
I've been thinking a lot about this topic because obviously I want a free market, I want an open market, I want like competition of currencies and all of that. But they have a point. They have a huge point on if everyone can have access to the dollar through stablecoins. We know that in Latin America, there's infinite demand for that. Every Latin American wants a dollarized account. And maybe that's because the meme of the dollar is so strong. And when that happens, then the only thing that you need from the Brazilian real, the Mexican peso, is basically having enough to use it as a payment mechanism. That's what happened in Argentina. Nobody hold their pesos but they need to use them to pay. So there's a big difference on like the store of value, the assets under management of the Argentinian peso as a store of value that it's basically zero, to assets under management as a payment mechanism. And this data point that you mentioned, that 20% of all outflows of Brazilian real were done in crypto, I completely see their point. And it's really risky because what should they do? Basically, if they do not know, if they do nothing, it could be like a selling spiral for the Brazilian real and for any fiat currency in Latin America. What do you think about this? Because it's not as simple as, let's go, stablecoins will rule. It has really big macroeconomic effects.
Yeah, I honestly, I don't agree with their proposal, but like I sympathize with it. I see where they're coming from. Like to your point, like this is the reality that Latin American countries have lived with over the last 60, 70 years, where there's currency crises, there's capital flight, there's all these things going on, and these are not easy problems to deal with, even when you're just operating with your own currency, right? So. And all of a sudden you're injecting like easy access to dollars, because historically it's been very difficult to access dollars in Brazil. It has not been something that is, there's not necessarily like, controls on it or currency controls, but it's the central bank has limited the supply and like the access to dollars here in the country. So it hasn't really been an issue that they had to worry about before. But now you're seeing a lot of money leaving the country via, USDT, for example, which is, basically like 80-90% of the overall volume that we can tell of crypto is leaving the country is in USDT. I'm interested to see like how, I haven't actually seen any other country propose this, and I haven't seen this subject really debated at like the global level either, right? So I'm kind of curious to hear like more of like, okay, what are there more of these discussions that are coming out of like the OECD? Or are there more of these discussions coming out of like other countries, maybe like in India or China or like other, obviously China's they have their own crypto policies for a long time now, right? So maybe not the best example, but like other countries that have like similar profiles to Brazil, is this something that has been sort of actively talked about in these kind of international policy working group circles? Or is Brazil just kind of going off on their own and saying like, hey, like we need to be able to I mean, for them, I think they're not necessarily trying to like prevent people from transacting. It's more of like they want to be able to monitor and access information and like monitor what's going on, right? So, which is obviously a lot of that's just kind of fundamentally at odds with what the values that people in the crypto community hold, right? And like the potential of this technology. So it's a tough. I mean, you got to sympathize with them a little bit, right? They're like, if all of a sudden like people are just dumping reais and trying to get into dollarized stable coins and sending that stuff out of the country as fast as possible, like that's not like that's going to be pretty difficult to. That's a whole other like box of problems you got to deal with, right?
I feel this is a similar argument to if we take dollars out of the equation. It's even what we saw with Bitcoin, for example, and one of the key concerns for U.S. regulators. It's, oh my God, there's a massive flight away from dollars, and everybody's now allocating. And instead of holding reserves, you're perhaps holding Bitcoin as a part of. And these institutions are allocating, not insignificant amounts of capital. And so I think ultimately you end up with two scenarios, right? Either we have, and I think this is a really interesting conversation at the geopolitical level, right? It's and we were just talking with Manu from Felix, right? What happens with the Guatemalan Quetzal in a world where USDC and USDT are much more robust and offer much more DeFi native primitives that allow you to take out loans and access better financial products, leveraging these services. So I think either yeah, exactly. It literally disappears, right? So, or we have these banks and governments take a very pro crypto stance because these are ultimately better financial primitives, because it's going to be quite useless to try and ban it, right? We've already seen instances where crypto is banned, and ultimately if there is sufficient demand, you'll be able to access crypto, right? So I think we either have these governments, they either need to accelerate, the end goal is like all money will come on chain, right? And I think that's a core thesis that we hold at Frontera, and it'll happen in Latin America. I think in a much more accelerated fashion.
Well, I think the banning question is interesting because a lot of the exchanges, the way that they've pushed back against this rule is they're saying like, look, it's basically impossible for us to enforce this, right? And it might be one of these things where maybe the goal is not a total like blackout ban on stable coins transacting in via self-custody wallets, but it might just be like, the bank just wants to throttle the flow of this stuff to the point where it's easier to manage. And it's like, okay, if 90% of the people are like following the rule, then great. And if like 10% of these people are kind of transacting outside the system, then we can't really, what are we going to do? There's not much we can do about that. Right. So it might just be maybe if like, it's kind of like with crypto today, right? Like if you want to transact with crypto, like you're basically kind of inside the crypto system at this point. Like if you really want to go private and like, no KYC, no anything like that. Like there's different ways you can do that, but it requires a much higher skill set, and you have to know how to use, I don't know, like Zcash or mixers or whatever. So it might end up being something like that where, these are the rules that are meant for like the 95% of people, but there's always going to be the 5% that can kind of outsmart them if they know what they're doing enough. So I'm really interested to see how this plays out, but it does look like, from what I can tell, from the people I've talked to who know most about this situation, is that the central bank is not very keen to walking back this rule, despite the complaints from the market.
Yeah, I think that looking at how the market has evolved, Brazil has been a trailblazer in this type of discussions. I mean, you can see it in the good way. It was then again the first country with a Solana ETF. And now it's one of the first countries to analyze, hey, stablecoins can drain our liquidity and can basically be an infinite selling pressure for our fiat currency. What the hell should we do, right? And they were some of the first ones to do this regulation. And I have this hypothesis that they are the first ones, but not the last ones, because it's so obvious for me. It might not be in the working groups of like central banks, but it's like in my internal working group in my head. I have an essay. I'm writing an essay about this specific thing. I shared it with Kush. It's a long overdue essay. I'd love to share it with you, Aaron, to get your input on it. And afterwards, we'll do an episode of Frontera about it. But it's really interesting to see this evolution. And also, I think that we haven't mentioned this, but just for people that are listening to Frontera, the population of Brazil is around 200 million people, a little bit more. And the GDP is around 2.1 trillion. And we're seeing this fintech evolution. We're seeing this regulatory evolution. Now, Aaron, just to start closing, I'd love to hear, how do you see the Brazilian market evolving in the next 3 to 5 years? Basically, it's a red ocean. Coinbase is there, Binance is there, OKX is there. BlackRock is definitely there. Itaú is thinking of launching a stablecoin. Basically, everyone wants a piece of the pie. Someone external, someone that analyzes the market, someone that understands crypto. What do you think will happen in Brazil in the next 5 years?
And if I could also just tack on to that question as well, right? Is because we mentioned these three players. It's the local players like Mercado Bitcoin, it's the banks and fintechs like Itaú, and it's the global players, right? It's who wins, why, maybe certain people take certain parts of the segment. But yeah, give us that, because I think that is also really fascinating and something we also explore often on this podcast, right? Because we were able to kind of have this overview of these three different stakeholders. But yeah, give us that very holistic overview of how do these three players interact with one another in Brazil?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what's going to happen is, and you're already starting to see this a little bit, where some of the local guys like your Mercado Bitcoins and your Foxbits, they're starting to pivot out of the retail exchange market, and they're really focusing more on things like asset tokenization. Like Mercado Bitcoin's Mercado Bitcoin's actually one of the biggest asset tokenizers in the world. I mean, people don't really realize that, but they've got, I can't even remember like how many of these things that they have floating around on the market right now, but they're actually one of the largest issuers of RWAs in the world. And a lot of this stuff is actually very unique to Brazil, like different types of credit products and things that are unique to the Brazilian market.
They did this partnership with Wormhole, right? So like they are deep diving on that.
Yeah, so that's part of it. So the Wormhole partnership would basically bring the interoperability to all these different RWAs. So if you're buying like Brazil, some sort of Brazilian credit instrument tokenized that's on the Stellar blockchain, and you want to access markets, DeFi markets on Solana or something with it, you could do that. That's kind of the idea. But they've been entering into a few different partnerships. I think they actually signed right before the whole Mantra OM collapse. Like they signed a partnership with Mantra to do like $200 billion worth of RWAs, and then that whole thing kind of blew up. So maybe not the best timing, but hey, you win some, you lose some, I guess. But so I think you're starting to see these guys, like, they're starting to move into more like B2B type of offerings, and like they're not competing as much for the retail market as they were before. And the retail market, I mean, you can kind of divide it into multiple segments, right? So you have kind of you're just sort of crypto curious people that are like, hey, I'm going to spend 10 reais, 50 reais, buy some Bitcoin. And that's a lot, like that's sort of the Nubank crowd, right? So I think Nubank coming in, I mean, they've onboarded a ton of users, but these users are not really traders. They're not really prosumers, if you want to use that term. These are people who are, I mean, Nubank's consumer base is a lot more of like kind of middle class to like lower middle class people that couldn't get access to banking services at Itaú or Bradesco or whatever. So these are people not without a huge disposable income. So they're spending, 10, 50 reais, 100 reais, per transaction, and they're just kind of buying and holding, right? They're not trading. So that's not, from an exchange perspective, that's not a great business to be in, because you make money on trading fees, and these people aren't trading, and it's pretty low ticket sizes. So not really making a whole lot of money on that. So I think some of these exchanges are more than happy to just let these fintech guys take that business. And I think, Binance is still the elephant in the room. They're still over, 50, 60% of the total trading volume in the market right now. They've had, there's been a lot of drama around Binance in this market over the past like 3-4 years, but they're still here. Looks like they're going to be, getting, they're in line to get a license once the licensing regime opens up, when the final regulations are published by the central bank. There will be, a queue. Basically, what's going to happen in Brazil with regards to licensing and regulation, once the central bank publishes its final regulations, hopefully later this year, on not just stable coins, but also VASPs, and then also other crypto service providers. So like custody solutions or staking solutions, whatever these things are. If you're servicing crypto, but you're not necessarily like intermediating, brokering crypto trades. So all these guys, there'll be a licensing process for all this stuff. And it's a 2-tiered licensing process. So you'll have to go through like one phase and then phase 2. And this will probably take like 2-3 years for these licenses to finally fully become start being issued. Like the process is going to take 2-3 years from what I hear. So it'll probably be around 2029 when we finally have like a licensed crypto company in Brazil. But I think once those regulations drop later this year, I think that's kind of like that's the starting gun essentially. Like everything up until now has kind of just been the warm up, kind of jockeying for position essentially. And then once the regulations drop, then it's officially kind of, off to the races, I think. And then the other big wild card here that people should be watching out for is the Drex project, which we've alluded to a bit here. And this is probably the most like interesting CBDC project in the world right now, I would argue. It has the status of the project is, it kind of ran aground during the first phase of the first pilot phase that they ran last year. It hasn't really produced. I mean, I think they're having a lot of technical issues. And they're having a bunch of other kind of staffing capacity issues, and they're having some questions about whether using Hyperledger Bazoo for this is the right. Do you even need a blockchain for this? So, so the Drex project is. I think the fate of this is very much up in the air right now. What's going to become of this? Is this going to be, is this going to like tokenize and revolutionize the Brazilian financial system? Does this become anything at all? We don't really know. It looks very much up in the air. I can definitely tell you the level of like hype around Drex. Around this time last year, like everybody was excited about Drex. Like everyone's, you had people selling like, Drex as a service, consultancy stuff, and like all this kind of. There's a lot of like hypey, grifty stuff around Drex this time last year, but now all that stuff is gone. So, but Drex did have the impact. If it achieves nothing else, it at least forced all these banks to get their hands like dirty with blockchain, right? So all these big banks, they're all running nodes on the network. So they had to build out engineering teams to be able to do this. They had to build out blockchain teams. They had to like devote significant resources to this. They had to understand the technology. If it achieves nothing else, at least it got all the banks like sort of knee deep into blockchain land. And then, we'll kind of see the fruits of that over the coming years. But so I think from those standpoints, I think things are kind of looking bright. I think, as far as what's going to be the status of the Brazilian market here, moving ahead, I think there's a lot of the economy here is really struggling. There's a lot of, prices are going higher, like inflation's going higher. The economy is a bit stagnant. Even just talking to like Uber drivers and service workers and stuff. It's like guys who are out there like hustling 80 hours a week just to like make enough money to pay the bills kind of thing. And, I like that type of environment. It's hard to see like, okay, where is the liquidity for a big crypto boom going to come from, right? When people are like just trying to really survive right now and just pay the bills, unfortunately. Hopefully, I think there's a lot of discontent with this current government. It's obviously not the most like pro-business government. There's hope that in 2026 things might turn around, but that's a whole nother conversation. But economically, like it's not the best time in Brazil right now from a prosperity perspective, I would say. So I think, it just begs the question of like how much liquidity is there going to be into these types of markets? It could be a good thing, right? It could be a boon because maybe people are trying to, anybody who's like middle class, upper middle class, upper class here is really trying to get their money out of Brazilian denominated assets and like into things that, out of the country, essentially into dollarized assets. So kind of playing back to the central bank conversation earlier, that is a desire that people have, is just to get out of Brazilian, denominated or real denominated assets, basically. So, yeah. So, there's a lot of varying factors here. I think the market's in a good place just from a structure standpoint. But there's a lot of moving variables here. It's a complicated dynamic.
Yeah, definitely. And so, like in a summary, there's a regulatory framework coming, and that could unclog a lot of crypto innovation. Also, as you were talking about the Drex project, basically they build this engineering power, and maybe the project fails because of its nature, because of CBDCs. I don't think that makes much sense. But it's a really interesting paradox because basically they've built a factory and now they need to produce things. What they can do, a stablecoin, like a Itaú stablecoin. I can see, I would love to talk with someone from Itaú saying, hey guys, we already have the nodes, we already have the engineering team, like we already have the assets. All of that was for Drex. What if we do our own stablecoin? It's basically adjusting a config, a couple of line of code in our backend, and now we have a stablecoin, right? So,
well, under Drex, the original idea for Drex is that each individual bank would be basically, you tokenize customer deposits, and then you're basically issuing them tokenized reals as stablecoins, right? So then you have the wholesale version, the wholesale digital real, the Drex. That's kind of the wholesale CBDC, and then each bank is basically issuing their own stablecoins to their customers against these tokenized deposits. So they have the infrastructure to do this stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, they've been building it, right?
It's like the government forcing you to create a factory to produce cars, and you say, "Hey, maybe producing computers is better, and we need the same infrastructure." So really interesting, Aaron. Thank you for coming to Frontera. Something that we always use to close our episodes is, could you tell us an insight that you found in the market, in the Brazilian market, that when you tell it to people, they are just surprised about it?
Brazil actually has a very active on-chain economy that I don't think most people realize, right? So you actually have the MetaMask guys were telling me this. This isn't really like a public stat, but they were telling me this just kind of, just candidly, that this was as of like 2 years ago. But Brazil actually has the second most MetaMask downloads or MetaMask users of any country after the United States.
Wow.
Which I thought was pretty interesting. And obviously, if you're a MetaMask user, that usually indicates that you're more of like an advanced user of crypto, right? You're probably doing some things in DeFi and staking and whatever else. You're not just like buying on an exchange and holding and selling if the price goes up, kind of thing, right? You're engaging in other kind of on-chain activity. So that was something that was really interesting. And then I would say like that's been confirmed just throughout my kind of travels and just adventures in this ecosystem, is meeting people who are really involved in very interesting on-chain type stuff. Everything from like governance to there's some people doing. I was at a conference just last week in Florianopolis where some people were talking about some of these new like on-chain governance type models, and this was stuff. It's like, wow, like there's a lot of talent here that like should be getting more airplay in like the global crypto scene, right? Yeah, the Ipe City, yeah, exactly. And I mean, there's a lot of talent here. I mean, it's not just like, hey, we're using stable coins to pay for stuff, look at us. But it's like, no, there's a lot of people here with like pretty revolutionary, incredible ideas. Approaching this technology from a state of like, it's not just this like fun thing that we can use to make money for ourselves, but it's like, no, like this has like Brazil's a country with a lot Brazil's a great country, but there's a lot of problems here, right? That people are always trying to find solutions to. So people are kind of approaching this technology through the lens of like, how can we use this to like solve our day-to-day problems? So I find that like very refreshing. And, so anyway, there's a lot of talent here that I was very surprised at, like just the level of talent here of people who are involved in this, not just to like make money quickly or whatever, but to really do like transformative stuff.
This is why we're so excited about this podcast, because we're essentially able to get the story out, because you have these two worlds. You have the crypto Twitter, super Euro American centric worlds, and then you have a lot of people on the ground building incredible things like Ipe City, right? And this podcast is essentially a bridge between those two worlds. But Aaron, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. Honestly, I think we could talk for days on end. There were so many subjects that we 100% could have double clicked on. So yeah, thank you again for coming to Frontera. This is a really awesome pod.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for the invite. Really appreciate it.
Where can people follow you? Personal recommendations, subscribe to the Brazil Crypto Report. I was telling Aaron that we use it a lot to source. It's the best news outlet or the news summary of what's happening in Brazil. In Frontera, we use it to source news from Brazil. So literally, we are 1 week lagging in Brazil information because we wait for Aaron to post it and then we like reproduce it. So where can people find you, man?
I mean, you guys are putting me under pressure here. So if I don't publish my report 1 week, you guys are,
we're in trouble.
leave it you hanging. So it's called Brazil Crypto Report. It's a Substack newsletter. I also have a podcast. So YouTube, Spotify, all the channels. And the podcast is similar to, it's very similar to what you guys are doing here. It's a lot of just interviewing, and it's a lot of talking about the different, the news events and trying to get some color on the various personalities and trends happening in the country. I'm also trying to do a bit more coverage of Latin America more broadly, just trying to produce more like kind of English language content about that. I'm also doing like I don't know when this is going to air, but I'm also undergoing like a platform rebrand right now. So I'll have some news on that, coming up as well. So kind of rebranding. I'll still be doing Brazil Crypto Report, but introducing like a new podcast series and like a new website and some other products and things and some other initiatives. So yeah, appreciate the invitation.
Awesome.
Really cool. I think that this is the beginning of a cool relationship because I see a lot of synergies between the three of us. So, Aaron, thank you for coming. You that you're listening to Frontera, remember to subscribe to the newsletter. Thank you for listening and see you next week. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Ciao.